Good morning.
Morning.
Well, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Kelly. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started with questions?
Sure. Well, first of all, Jim, thanks for having me today, and congratulations on such a wonderful conference. I'm an IBM Senior Vice President with the company and in the IT industry for almost 4 decades. So a lot of experience in core technology, data, and all the aspects of it. I've done everything from IBM research through development, manufacturing, running businesses, and today I'm responsible for not only IBM's global research, but a number of IBM's businesses ranging from cybersecurity to big data and analytics to Watson and Watson Health, the application of AI into healthcare.
So your early days were really in the cognitive computing. I'd be interested in how that did transition to machine learning and artificial intelligence and Watson, and then later on specific to healthcare.
Sure, Jim. So it's sort of an interesting journey. IBM has, like many of the academic institutions, worked in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence really going back to the 50s when some IBM researchers were trying to teach primitive computers to play things like checkers. I first got involved in this whole area of computational artificial intelligence, machine learning, back in the late 90s when we built a system called Deep Blue, which went on to defeat Garry Kasparov in the game of chess. It was the first computer system to beat a grandmaster, and that had several aspects of machine learning in it, and I became fascinated by that. Fast forward to 2007, when we in IBM Research decided to get very serious again about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and this, by the way, was in one of the AI winters. So it wasn't fashionable to be working on this, but we had a number of technologies, and we decided in 2007 that by 2010, 2011, we would have enough compute power, our AI machine learning algorithms would be sophisticated enough, and enough of the world's data would be digitized that we could pull those 3 things together and produce a machine that could start to do some amazing things. And that is the machine that went on to become Watson, and you remember the infamous Jeopardy game. But it was that course of action, and then you say, well, how do you go from a Jeopardy game machine to Watson in healthcare? And it was very obvious to us that we were not just developing a machine to win a game show, that when we looked at the world's explosion in data, doubling every 12 to 18 months, that we needed a different paradigm for computing, that we didn't have enough programmers and coders in the world to deal with that explosion in data. So we felt that we had to go on a different compute path, leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, machines that would learn at scale and deal not only with large data, but very complex, very diverse, very unstructured data. And as we looked around at industries, of course, financial services were big in, but we became really intrigued by healthcare. Given the size of the data, the trends in healthcare moving to more of a digital domain, and the amount of unstructured data. So in 2014, we started to train the machine, working with some of our colleagues and partners like Memorial Sloan Kettering. And then in 2015, we stood up an entire division of IBM in the area of healthcare, leveraging artificial intelligence. So it's been an interesting journey from sort of game machines to healthcare, but we've now got, I think, some of the most advanced products in the market with leveraging artificial intelligence in healthcare.
So let's talk about healthcare. And let's start with discovery in terms of how can AI machine learning support clinical trials, whether it's identifying cohorts of patients, enrolling patients, or the execution of the trial itself?
Yeah, great question, Jim. So I have felt and said from the very beginning that probably the killer app for artificial intelligence in any domain, but specifically in healthcare, is discovery. And we have 2 major areas of discovery. One is actually a tool for drug discovery, Watson for drug discovery. And this is a tool which fundamentally reads all of the literature relating to molecules, pathways, existing drugs, and is a tool whereby Watson will draw correlations, it will look for targets, and allow a drug researcher to explore all existing knowledge and the limits of knowledge. By the way, it also has read and understands every patent in the world relating to drugs. So it can move from weeks of exploring the literature to minutes using this tool. So drug discovery is a big one. On the other extreme that you mentioned is in the area of clinical trial matching. So here, and you'll see a pattern, we're always working with partners in healthcare in different ways. In this case, the Mayo Clinic was our partner, and the use case was basically trying to improve the percentage of patients that will make it into clinical trials. And they were at about a 1% rate. So we developed a version of Watson which, simply put, reads and understands all existing clinical trials from the clinical trial database, reads and understands the individual patient's medical records, electronic medical records, and then does a match. And the first disease state that we chose with Mayo was breast cancer. As I said, they started with around 1% of their patients being matched. They now, in breast cancer, use Watson to match, I think, nearly 100% of their patients. And the acceptance rate into clinical trials has jumped by 80%. So we now have a tool that, instead of humans taking hours to try to do this matching between clinical trials and patient, takes about 2 minutes for the system to do a match with very high precision.
So in machine learning, you obviously need to start with a set of data for training.
Yes.
So with Memorial Sloan Kettering, is there a bias to that data? And how do you overcome biases if you decide you want to extend that to other parts of the world?
Again, a fantastic question. So I think you have to start with an understanding that an artificial intelligence machine, as it comes out of the box, so to speak, knows nothing. And all of its knowledge comes from, and all of its ability to, quote unquote, reason, comes from the data that it's fed. So you start with something that's, I'll say, as dumb as that table, and you have to carefully choose what data is going to be used and who is going to assist in the training if you're doing supervised learning on that system. So in the case of oncology, we chose initially to work with Memorial Sloan Kettering because of our belief that they are certainly one of the best in the world and had one of the largest sets of expertise and data sets on both protocols but also outcomes. And so partnering with Memorial Sloan Kettering, we have taught Watson to understand medical records, understand the details of, I think we're up to 16 different types of cancer now, and we're going to do them all. We're doing a new cancer every 30 to 60 days. But we trained on both the Memorial Sloan Kettering data set, which is one of the most extensive in the world and detailed in the world, with the assistance of Memorial Sloan Kettering doctors. And that is the product and offering, Watson for Oncology, that we now have in the marketplace. It's going fabulously. I think we've passed 50,000 patients and doctors already. Coming down here, I did a quick calculation in my head, Jim. Just in a few minutes, we're going to be together here. Someplace between 5 and 10 doctors and cancer patients will consult with Watson just while we're sitting here to decide what to do in terms of treatments and protocols. So now the question is, we've trained the system with Memorial Sloan Kettering, and now we need to, as we go to other cancers or go globally, many institutions, of course, want to put in their local protocols and whatnot, but we have to, through a group of people in a transparent way, decide what data is now going to be fed into that system. Because, again, there will be some level of bias in every artificial intelligence system, depending on what data it was trained with.
So IBM Healthcare is one sector. You have other sectors in the economy that you support. Any lessons learned from AI and machine learning in those other sectors that you're able to apply to healthcare?
Absolutely. So, well, let's see, as an example, financial services is one of the largest sectors and industries that IBM's always been involved in. You know, every financial transaction on the planet somehow goes through one of our systems or databases. So, you know, for instance, we have learned that security and the privacy of that data is paramount. That's bedrock. Secondly, we have learned what it takes to scale these solutions. So in financial services, we've built a number of solutions that range all the way from call center assistance from a Watson AI machine where hundreds of thousands of calls will be handled either by the machine or man and machine every single day with higher precision than just the human and with much better customer satisfaction than just a human on their own. We have learned that how you take the artificial intelligence system and solution and put it in the workflow is critical. So an example from another industry would be the oil and gas industry. We have, for instance, trained Watson with a very large oil and gas company, not just in oil exploration, but all the way down to the engineer or technician on an oil platform in the middle of the North Atlantic, where you need to bring the history and learning of that platform and projects, but you need to bring it to that person when they're making a decision. So understanding the workflow of that engineer or technician on that platform in the North Atlantic and getting it right in place at that time is critical. So these, again, when you then look at healthcare, it's not just good enough to have an algorithm. It's not just good enough to have a great product, but figuring out how to get that in the physician's hands or the healthcare provider's hands at the time and point of decision in their normal workflow without disrupting the whole workflow is really the magic in making this happen.
So I'm going to take a question from the audience. What are the false positives and false negatives you have witnessed with Watson? And I would add on, and how do you deal with those?
Yes, so this starts with, we have to understand that these artificial intelligence systems, by and large, are statistical machines. And that's a much different world than the history of computing that you and I spent decades in, where you get a precise answer based on the math. We're dealing with unstructured data, and we're dealing with probabilities, where there isn't always a right or wrong answer. It's shades of gray. There are better answers than others. So we deal with false positives and false negatives by continuous learning, by examining those false positives and negatives as we see them. We trace back into the algorithms and look at how, in our case, Watson reaches that conclusion, and then we try to learn from them, and we try to adjust all of those clip levels. And I was interested in the group that was up here before us was talking about this whole issue of, you know, bias entering and defects in these systems and transparency of how those decisions are made. We are a huge believer that in an artificial intelligence system, it's critical that everyone involved know what that data was that it was trained on, and that the algorithms and the use of AI is transparent. So, you know, as a company, we have stood up and said, your data is your data. We're not going to reuse it for something else without your permission, obviously. If we use artificial intelligence in one of our products or offerings, we will tell you, and we will tell you how we did it. And we will also be transparent in who trained it. And in our case, all of our offerings, if you take Watson for Oncology, a physician can can look at that set of recommendations and click right through all the way down to how did Watson reach that decision based on what data, in what journals, what patient cohorts, et cetera. So this transparency. And we think if you line all of that up, then you can start to work your way down through false positives and negatives.
So the next question may have an implication for sort of our informatics workforce and electronic health records. So for decades, right, we have informatics, and we develop clinical decision support rules, right, mostly based on Boolean operators that don't change, right? They persist. Do you see AI and machine learning displacing what is clinical decision support today, and what does that mean to how we train informaticists?
I think it's going to change dramatically, Jim. You know, this is a perfect example of where we just don't, in those older systems, we wrote the rules. They were rules-based. And fundamentally, two things. One is we were going to run out of people to write those rules, the same way we're going to run out of people to program systems. But in the very way we wrote those rules, we introduced a tremendous amount of bias. Flip over to an artificial intelligence system. Yes, it will have some bias based on the data and training methods. But at least in our systems, we leave the statistical analysis wide open to really examine the whole space. And we find and see things through these artificial intelligence systems that humans can't find. And I'll give you maybe one example of that. So we have a partnership with Medtronic in the area of diabetes. And we have developed a product together. And the history of that product sort of goes as follows. As you know, Medtronic builds blood glucose monitors for diabetics. They had stored a tremendous amount of data from those blood glucose monitors, but the state of the art was sort of when your blood glucose hits a certain level, an alarm goes off. We took that massive amount of data and data that we and IBM have among our roughly 150 million individual medical history files. We took 10,000 diabetics. We took those two data sets and we let Watson learn in an unsupervised way over that data set. What Watson came back with was it found 21 unique features in those two data sets that allowed it to conclude these are the parameters that not only talk about that person at this time, but have predictive capability. So now this system can predict 3 or 4 hours ahead of time with almost 90% precision that a person is undergo a hypoglycemic attack. Those 21 or 22 features, Jim, I don't think humans would ever have found.
Right.
And so been able to write enough rules to do that. So we've gone from writing rules and chasing everything we see to unleashing these AI systems to find new things that we wouldn't have done. And then not only talk about the moment, but reason and predict the future.
So I'm going to take a right turn here.
Okay.
Cybersecurity. What concerns you most about cybersecurity in relationship to AI and machine learning?
So I speak from a lot of experience in cybersecurity. You know, it's always been an important aspect of IBM's business, and one of the businesses I lead is cybersecurity. But the thing, again, we have to realize I'll call it the old programmable world of the computers, again, that you and I have built for decades, the way you corrupt or do something to that system is you inject it with software into the programming models, and you cause it to do things based on the internal programming of the system, traditional computing. In an artificial intelligence system, there's not a lot of programming in there that you can get into to hack or disrupt. The way you disrupt an artificial intelligence system is you inject data into that system, which will cause it to relearn to do things differently than it's intended to do. And you would be surprised or shocked at, if you have enough knowledge of how that AI system works, you'd be surprised at how little data needs to be injected into those learning engines to cause that AI system to conclude something entirely different than it knows, than it thinks it knows. So the whole area of cybersecurity has gone from, in the old days of IBM, glass house, lock the room, to the past decade or so has been deep analytics on behavioral analysis of our systems, to now all of our cybersecurity defenses in the companies we work with and inside of Watson is to protect those learning engines and protect the training data such that an injection into those learning engines or that data cannot cause Watson to do something it's not supposed to.
So you're using AI to protect AI?
We're using AI because to get into the system, it has to be an artificial intelligence machine that gets in there with data, and it is trained to morph and correct itself depending on what it experiences. The only thing that can defend against that at machine AI speed is an artificial intelligence engine and wall inside that machine. So we literally are facing a world that's going to move to AI versus AI. And I think it's a great question because I think a lot of people don't understand this. And if you're just playing around with any old AI system, you're taking a very high risk. It's the next battlefront of cybersecurity.
So another question from the audience. How do you ensure diversity in data used to train Watson? How do you ensure the diversity of data to train Watson? Goes a little bit into the bias.
Into the bias, that's right. So this is where humans and knowledgeable people and responsible people have to come in. And I think, by the way, to your other question, this will be a critical field in the future of healthcare. What data do you choose? Who chooses it? And how and in what order is it fed into the system? It's almost a new discipline that we're creating. Or it's beyond data science. It's beyond the core artificial intelligence because you need domain expertise.
Might be our new informaticians.
I think it is, Jim. I really think it is because you need all those aspects. So today, what we do is, we work with the best, the Memorial Sloan Ketterings of the world, to ensure we've got a very high standard of knowledge. And then we, through teams of experts, decide, okay, what additional data will be fed into that Watson for Oncology solution? And how will it be portrayed? And what machine learning engines will be used to do that? So the role of we as humans then changes to how do we train these AI machines to do what we want in good ways? And then how do we work with these machines to reach better decisions? So it's going to be a sort of a brave new world.
So over the past few days, we've heard about diagnostics, therapeutics, supporting the provider. Mm-hmm. Does the patient fit into this model at all, and how?
Absolutely, absolutely. The patient experience and confidence goes up dramatically, and I'll share with you again in the area of oncology because that's where we have the tens of thousands of patients that we've already and doctors that we've already worked with. When we built Watson for Oncology with Memorial Sloan Kettering, we worked very closely with their doctors to put the right user interface in and the right transparency in how Watson's making that decision basically on an iPad. And now they or a doctor in India, China, Thailand can look at that screen and get the best advice in the world from that system based on what it learned from MSK. But interestingly, what we have found time and time again, and the physicians will tell us this, and the patients, the testimonials are unbelievable. when the physician takes that screen and now turns it to the patient and says, now let's look at this together. This is what I believe. Here's some more data from Watson. Here's some things unique about you. What we're finding is that not only is the physician more confident, but the patient now understands the decision process. And time again, the cancer patient will tell us and the physician, I now understand that we've explored all options. I understand how we're making this choice together. And ultimately, when we choose a protocol or chemotherapy or a regimen, I believe that the best knowledge in the world is being used to treat me. And I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but I'm now convinced that there isn't some piece of knowledge that hasn't been brought to the table in my treatment. And the whole confidence and experience between the doctor and the patient has just moved to an entirely different level. So it's a great thing for the patients.
So the first session this morning was on medical devices. When does Watson cross the threshold and become a medical device and under the purview of the FDA, or does it?
It does not today because it's an information system. Obviously, as we move Watson more and more into areas in image recognition, where it's providing more and more advice, we'll be working with the FDA in terms of how to deal with that. The device and product that I spoke to with Medtronic will require and just went through an FDA approval process. So as we go from supplying information to really providing a strong recommendation, obviously we'll cross the line into a medical device. Not a concern of ours. We deal in a regulated industry and heavily regulated industry and financial services. So it's not something we in IBM are at all uncomfortable with. And I think, but it'll be a learning experience both for us, the providers, as well as the regulators.
So being an IT company, you understand the Gartner hype curve.
Yes.
Where do you put AI and machine learning in healthcare?
I wish I had sat through the last 2 days here. I would have probably had a more informed answer. But I think we have, in many cases, gone past the peak of the hype. And we're now really on the let's get it done serious business part of the hype curve. I think in most cases, reality is set in. If it hasn't, just think about what I told you about biases and cybersecurity threats and whatnot, and limitations of these systems. So I think at least we're past that, and I think many of our partners are past that. But that said, again, having been in this industry for nearly 4 decades now, I honestly believe, Jim, I have never seen a technology that's as transformative as this one. It is transforming every industry that we deal with, and the opportunity in healthcare, and I'm not trying to put us back on the hype curve, but the opportunity is enormous to transform this industry for better outcomes, lower cost, for the benefit of all. But it's now into the hard work portion of this. It is not easy to build a very intelligent, at scale, precise artificial intelligence system to be injected in the workflow of a clinical physician or a drug researcher. That is a big job. And by the way, you better have a heck of a lot of good data to train that system. So we're now into the let's get it done serious part of this curve.
So we have about a half a minute left, so I'm going to give it to you in terms of whether you want to talk about what is AI in 5 years in healthcare, whatever you'd like to end with. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Jim. With all the progress we've made, I am absolutely convinced we are just at the beginning of what this technology is going to do in healthcare. It reminds me of the early days of other major technology breakthroughs where there's a lot of excitement and people would get together and by the way, this will be even bigger next year if it touches on AI. but we're at the very beginning. When I know what we're doing in our research labs. I know the products that we're building. I know the sophistication of some of our most advanced AI algorithms and techniques. I know the scale of the compute power, and I know where compute power is going. And I believe that as early as 5 years from now, certainly by 10 years, there will not be a decision made in healthcare that isn't somehow influenced or assisted by artificial intelligence.
Very good.
I'm absolutely convinced. And that is because of the necessity of it. And who would not want to make a better decision leveraging AI in an area that's so critical as healthcare?
Well, we'll end there, and thank you for your insights.
Okay, thank you.